Welcome to UberCube, the podcast where we discuss all things cube, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, aka UberBear. Thank you.
Bear, it's just Bear. Forget the Uber, it's just Bear.
And I'm joined by my other loud host to the left of me here. What you got?
Hey, this is Stu. How y'all doing today? And as always, by our other host.
With beautiful ginger hair.
Hi, this is also Stu. Just kidding. It's me.
Tell us about that hair, May. It's beautiful.
May's done a bit of a job. It looks sensational.
Sensational. Well, so we've got, we're in that Wilds of Eldraine season.
Whoa.
Right? Whoa. And
woe be me.
Yeah, there's one person a heck of a lot more excited than the rest of us. And if there was a set that was ever made for an individual...
a cube.
And a cube. I think we have found it.
It's this one.
It's this one.
It is this one.
This is the Innistrades for me. This is the Brothers Wars for me. But now we have the Eldraines. And who was most excited for that?
Me. I was excited. There's no need to sugarcoat it. I'm living for the Wilds of Eldraine. And all during spoiler season, I was just sitting there waiting for the next card. And I'm like, yep. That one's another one that's probably I'm interested in.
Is there a cube by any chance that you may be a curator of that you're particularly excited for the WOE cards, May? Just interested?
Well, there is a particular cube that I happen to be curating for, and it's called the Fae Cube. May's Fae Cube, specifically.
We've never heard of it.
It's going to be at CubeCon.
Sweet.
So, if you haven't heard of it, or you have heard of it, I hope to see you there, and I hope to see you drafting the cube. And having fun. And give me your thoughts. Please give me your thoughts.
So this is kind of the first episode that we're going to do as a preliminary for the journey to CubeCon 2023. And we're going to kind of interview actually, this is the second one, actually, in fact. But, removing that statement, what we're going to talk about is preparation for CubeCon, what cards you intend to add, basically what cards have come out recently you think you're going to add, and how you're going to get ready for this big audience of 400 plus people to play test the Fae Cube.
Because we've talked about other cubes and how they've evolved and all that kind of stuff, but this one is going to focus definitely on May's Fae Cube, but also I think it's going to be a good sort of how to evaluate and look at cards and look at your archetypes when a new set comes out. So before we get cracking, let's do what we always do. Anthony brought something special for us today. Tell us what we got here.
It is the unofficial UberCube beer, and it's going to be Goose Island Beer Company Neon Beer Hug IPA in my case. What do you got, Stu?
I've got a Goose Island. It's the Juicy Beer Hug IPA. May, what about yourself?
I just have a Kirkland red wine.
Nice.
As I've been having for the last few episodes. I like my red wine. What can I say?
Me too.
So simply red. Let's go.
Go.
All right. So as we said before, prepping May's Cube for CubeCon 2023. Stu and I are going to throw some curveballs that are preordained. They're on my sheet, so unfortunately May gets to see them, unlike she likes to do for me. But we're going to kind of ask some very deliberate questions before we get into the meat and potatoes of what she wants to add to the Fae Cube.
Yep.
And so, Stu, would you mind taking off this first one here?
All right, May. Question number 1. No pressure. What, in your opinion, is the best deck to draft to win the Fae Cube? Right? I'm sitting down. I'm like, May, listen, I have got $5,000 on this draft with Anthony. Okay. He's betting me that I got to win this. I got to go 6-0, 2-0, whatever the case may be. I want you to tell me, how do I sit down? How do I win this cube? What's the archetype? What's the deck that you're telling me to draft?
So the thing about this cube is that I crafted it so that way it's kind of a rock, paper, scissors type meta. So that way you're going to essentially be picking one of these major players. I'm trying to think of the best way to explain it outside of the best deck is Changelings, but you're not going to be able to draft Changelings, period. The Changeling deck just does not come together. They are hotly demanded. If somebody isn't there eating their vegetables and you end up with all the Changeling cards, you're probably winning that draft.
Can we bring our own Changelings, May?
Just hide them up your sleeve. It's fine.
That's an Anthony strategy if ever I heard one.
Best contenders at the moment is we have Golgari midrange, which has been a staple of the cube for a while, where it is this black-green value package where it's focused a lot around either party or elves or whatever Golgari value things that you step in. There's a food variant that came out, and a lot of drafting around that just comes around outvaluing and then hitting your top end and just closing the game with something like Howl of the Night Pack or whatnot. And the next couple decks are things like Mill, which Mill is a little bit in a weaker spot right now just because it's lost its Fractured Sanity, but like Fractured Sanity shouldn't have been the main reason behind that anyways. Rakdos Goblins are a bit faster than Golgari midrange, and they can take over the board really quickly. So if you really want to go for that aggro package, go for Rakdos Goblins or White Weenie. Both of those are really good. And I would say that the last one would be of like the most winniest deck that we've had recently. I think it was the Reanimator control deck, where you had things like Strands of Night, Una, and a bunch of miscellaneous control cards, and you're trying to focus around getting Una close the game.
Okay, so it's funny you should mention Una, because I may have flagged that one before as a potential high risk, high reward type
Listen,
of card.
the last time I drafted the Fae Cube, I drafted a mostly blue with some Dimir. I think I might have even splashed some kind of Sultai, but mostly blue. And it was very, very strong. I'm pretty sure we may have only played 2 matches with it, but I won both games with that. So I'm definitely excited to see how like the blue packages evolve in the cube.
It's a very strong archetype.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the Fae Cube quite a bit at this. We've done a primer. Please refer to those episodes. May was one of our first guests when we first started doing this.
Yep.
Now she's a permanent party member here.
That's right.
She took on which class, by the way, May? Are you warrior? Are you wizard? What's your class?
Oh, I'm a wizard or sorceress.
Cool.
Shoot, make your pick.
So one of the questions that I have, and this is for the people going to CubeCon specifically, because people are going to want to sit down and they're going to want to win, but also people want to have fun. In your opinion, as the curator of the Fae Cube, which deck is the most fun to pilot?
Land Up Red.
Which consists of?
So Land Up Red is essentially I'm trying to think of the best way to explain it, but it's this weird package that you don't really see in other environments where you have things like Countryside Crusher or Scale Guardian, and you're trying to discard or mill or get your lands into your graveyard to get a bunch of triggers on your Countryside Crusher or cheat out your or Scale Guardian, and then there's just a bunch of other things. There's also the bird combo where you have Swans of Bear Grylls, because I don't remember what his name is, sorry.
Bear Grylls.
But you have Swans, and then you have the enchantment where you discard land in order to deal 2 damage. Deal damage to the bird, draw a new card, discard another land, deal 2 damage to the bird. You rinse, repeat.
Okay, so we have another question, because that's going to be the fun one. Stu, would you mind taking on this next question, the second one here in the line?
So, I don't have much of an ego in Magic, but sometimes I like to make life difficult for myself, just as a kind of test to see how good a drafter I might be, and even as good as a player, right? I want to draft the hardest deck, right? Not only do I want to draft the hardest deck because it might be complicated to play, and maybe that's a bit of a secondary, but I want to draft the hardest deck because it's got the most, like the critical density of cards is the most difficult to obtain in the draft. Maybe there's some value pieces in there that are difficult to get and in high demand. Tell me about how you would draft a deck like that, or what might be a deck that would be the hardest to construct based on that critical mass of those important cards.
To put it in perspective, we did a recent episode on psychographics, right? And we talked about the Jennies and Johnnies, and that's kind of what this question's formed before. And the first one is the best deck. I feel like I was modeling that a little bit towards the spiky.
That's the spike.
Yeah, the spikes, right?
What would you say? This is more on the Johnny side?
I think so.
Okay, yeah, I like that. So
I have a spicy suggestion for you.
All right.
Orzhov Humans. The reason why is because there's a bit of it's kind of an enchantment package, but black has a lot of built-in tutors. Like, the whole cube has a lot of tutors, but white has a lot of enchantment tutors. Black has a lot of built-in just free tutors. And the goal of the deck is that you're trying to put Angel of Glory's Rise in your graveyard, fill your deck with a bunch of humans, and then play Strands of Night. Essentially what you do is that you can keep playing your humans and build this kind of human toolbox over and over. And there's a really cool thing that you could do with like self-mill stuff and build up your board and then just as soon as you drop Angel of Glory's Rise, just mass reanimate, get rid of all of your opponent's changelings, and then take over the game. And I've built it a couple times. It's a really, really fun deck. And while I won't say that it is the most consistent to draft, which is the biggest issue, when it does come together, it does feel really, really good.
So how many of those pieces would you determine to be value pieces that are just strong individually, strong in other archetypes? Like, you know, you could give it as a percentage or just name some high power cards within that archetype that may just be as equally, if not more so strong in other archetypes that might make them difficult to draft.
Sure. Obviously, there's going to be a good amount of humans that are just contested because, good cards. And if somebody's trying to draft into, say, white weenies, then you're going to end up in contest for a lot of those human cards. And, of course, changelings being one of the big overly contested piece. What's cool about Angel of Glory's Rise is that it puts you in a position where if you don't have a lot of changelings, you can actually take advantage of the fact that you don't have changelings. But something like Strands of Night, it is pretty decent reanimate piece by itself, but once you build a dedicated Strands of Night deck, which in the case of Orzhow's humans, it can be a dedicated Strands of Night deck, then suddenly it makes the Johnny wheel turn.
Would you mind telling the audience what Angel of Glory's Rise does, please, May?
Sure. Angel of Glory's Rise is a 7 cost. It's 5 white for Angel, 4/6 flyer, and when she enters the battlefield, exile all zombies, then return all human creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. What you might not realize on first glance is that while zombies aren't in the cube, changelings are, and changelings are absolutely very, very important for deck building in this environment. So being able to have this top end to clear out your opponent's changelings and then get back a bunch of your humans can be a huge payoff. Not only that,
living death
it has
type
a really
of
good
in
matchup
white,
against
so it's
mill,
really interesting in this environment. I like that choice. When you mentioned that, that's a cool line of play that I think kind of talked about recently with David McDarby, how something like Blasphemous Act on face value looks like Blasphemous Act, do 13 damage to each creature on the board. But when you start adding in secondary effects to it, suddenly it becomes a damage enabler or a kill spell, right? Something like Angels of Glory Rise in this has a lot more than just the initial face value. So it would be nice to announce, or I hope listeners are going to be at CubeCon will pick up on the fact that there are no zombies, but your changelings now get essentially board wiped, and then yours can come back. So kind of building a really cool living death engine here. I like it a lot.
I like that.
On a card that doesn't look like that on face value. Very interesting.
And what's particularly nasty with Strands of Night is that repeated reanimate. It doesn't matter if they answer the Angel of Glory's Rise. At that point in the game, you've already created a position where you've won. You have your Strands of Night, you have your Angel of Glory's Rise in the graveyard. At that point, it's just a matter of accruing value before your opponent can, respond.
Interesting. So as we talked about, Wilds of Eldraine has come out, right? And I wanted to have an open discussion that will kind of feed into this as we talk about the Fae Cube as it is now and what it will become before CubeCon 2023 or what you're going to test. But your initial thoughts on WOE, do you feel like it's helpful just as a 40,000 feet? Is it beneficial to the cube or is it creating...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's filling in a lot of gaps.
Oh, yeah. I feel like that I've had a lot of problems with the Fae Cube where there's specific niches of cards that I'm looking for that didn't exist yet. And there were a lot of cards that fit that specific niche that I was looking for that came out in Wilds of Eldraine that I almost want to say were kind of made for the cube.
And I know how particular you are about the flavor of this cube, right? You are quite unwilling to break the flavor and just like the vibe of this cube just for a necessary card that might really help an archetype out. But if it doesn't fit, you've always said that the vibe is just so important to this cube, right?
Oh, it absolutely is. There are currently 2 cards, I think, that break the flavor, but
we'll get to those. We have some that we've actually identified as we go through the notes here. So since this is a new set and we're in pre-release season and price evaluations are out, that was going to be a question that I was going to ask you. I know from previous conversation that I think it's $2, right? And that your cap to make the accessibility to people that want to copy and clone the Fae Cube.
A lot of people make clones of the Fae Cube. I get a notification at least once a week of somebody else who just made a clone of the Fae Cube. And this isn't me stroking my ego. It's more of consideration that I have to make as a curator of people are looking for a good cube that they can make for cheap, that they can enjoy with people, and when updates come out, they don't have to drop a lot of money into it. And that was a huge consideration when I was making a lot of the changes.
So I guess the question is, when this new set comes out, what if a card suddenly becomes impactful in another structured gameplay of Magic, like it goes Legacy or goes Vintage or goes Modern, right?
Then it's out.
It's out. Okay, it's that simple. But right now, in pre-release season, if you see a card for 49 cents, you say, give me, right? But if it spikes up to $2.50 in the next 4 weeks because of a tournament, it's out. Is that the...
Yep.
That's the rule of thumb?
Do you give yourself a bit of a time threshold based on the fact, like you say, this is a pretty famous cube at this point, right? It's been cloned a bunch of times. A lot of people are very, very familiar with it. You update this cube. I know that there's been times where we've been chatting on the Discords and the socials, like, updated the Fae Cube again. 3 hours later, I bought some more cards for the Fae Cube again. And then the next day, like, you know what? I totally redesigned this entire archetype of the Fae Cube again. Do you give a little bit of time? Like, because, sometimes cards can go spiky and sometimes they can drop again based on, demand for whatever reason. Do you give yourself a little bit of time between when a card might potentially spike before you might think about taking it out?
Yeah, I tend to give it a bit of time, but usually the cases where it stays at high value, it's because of a lack of reprints rather than a demand for other formats.
Yeah.
Is the best way that I can put it. So I used to have like Tangle in this cube. I'm not going to go into what the card actually is because I used to have a Turbo Fog package, right? And Tangle used to be around like little less than $2, but then it started seeing Pauper play. It started getting into other formats. People started putting in their EDH decks. Whatever the behind factors of why Tangle got so expensive, the root cause of why it kept going up is because no reprints.
I can see that with this cube, like when you said Pauper play and that being a legitimate format, that a lot of times that can kind of assault your price tag, right? Because you do seem to lean into a lot of uncommon and common type cards, right? And I can see where some of that competitive play, even though it's softer competitive, could definitely drive up some of the prices and just take them out of your threshold.
Oh, like Spellstrider Sprite is the only major exception to the price point because that card is so important for what the cube represents and what it does. Plus, it's also just my favorite art.
And I would say maybe this is a little like Standard, I think, has kind of dropped off a little bit, at least from the discussion that I've seen online on the socials. There doesn't seem to be the vibe and the discussion and the enthusiasm as much about Standard as like years ago. I used to remember everybody talking about every set and all the discussion was about Standard, a little bit about the other 60 card Eternal formats.
Which is unfortunate.
It is. It's very unfortunate because I think a healthy Standard is such a good place for Magic to be. But now with Modern, which also, definitely Modern saw, some improvements and some cards that would be impactful. And we've definitely seen, in my opinion, significant changes over the last few sets for Modern. I don't know if anything from this set or as much from this set is maybe going to be super impactful for Modern. Legacy, Vintage, almost certainly not. So maybe it's nice when we've got sets like this that are just incredibly thematic. They don't have to be super off the charts when it comes to the power level, but things like this I think are really custom made for for your cube. Let's just put it out there. This whole set was just made for May's Fae Cube. It's just perfect. So the prices are going to stay reasonable. Everyone should just go out there and clone this cube for sure.
So Eldraine came out in 2019, right? And it was more of a Camelot meets Grimm's Fairy Tales type of. That was the flavor win for that one. This one's more of a little bit of Camelot, but not a whole lot, but a lot more Candyland, which is interesting. Like it's very Sugar Rush candy. It's gummy bears fighting back. I don't know. It's weird. The art's amazing. But
there is certainly an aspect to that because of the plot line with Hansel and Gretel. Rest in peace, Hansel. But what?
Too soon, May. Too soon.
But what's important to keep in mind is that the Wilds of Eldraine is a kind of sub-realm of Eldraine, and when it comes to the lore of Eldraine, which, there's a lot of stuff behind that I'm not going to get into right now because, my Fae Cube isn't just Eldraine, but Eldraine is a big part of the Fae Cube. And when it comes to the Candyland-esque pieces, a lot of them I'm kind of passing over because they're not quite what I am looking for in terms of flavor, because they don't really contribute much to the fairy tale-esque ideas. It's just more of an expansion of that Eldraine lore, and specifically with those characters with Gretel.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I looked at Uberbear's Horror Cube, and actually, as we speak, have no additions to that from this set. Even though some of these pieces of candy are pretty horrific, it just felt like a flavor fail when I'm trying to do this gothic horror type thing.
Bear's Horror Cube.
Yeah.
Let's just...
And I'm just not
Bear's
going
Horror
to
Cube.
have a donut in there with a bunch of zombies. So there's that, right?
Like, let me make it clear. I love the candy monsters. I think that they're great. I love the design of them. I just love what they're trying to do with it. I want to shove as many as I can into my food deck just because it's hilarious. But when it comes to the context of the Fae Cube and my environment, it's just not quite what I'm looking for. When a lot of those pieces, I would rather have something else in that spot.
I think that actually leads us into our next point here. Weaponizing food, right? So this is something that's obviously a big part of your cube. A lot of food-related cards in there. I will say the first time I saw the food, I was like, oh, cool. An artifact. You get to, sack and gain 3 life. That's interesting. Obviously, there's much more that can be expanded on with the Fae Cube and with, plenty of other cards that have come out since food has really been popularized. What are you doing with food, and how has food as a type been impacted by this new set?
So, food as a kind of archetype thing has been expanded a lot in the last few years, because we've gotten a lot of food cards, especially from like Lord of the Rings, and food itself is not really a cornerstone mechanic to the cube, but it is one of the most important contexts for both Eldraine and the Fae Cube, because food is a key element in a lot of fairy tales. It's a big part of what makes these fairy tales, well, fairy tales. And it's easy to make decisions like replacing Sign in Blood for Foreboding Fruit, right? Where Foreboding Fruit is just the same thing, but worse. But if you pay 3 black, then you also get a food. And trying to figure out ways to make those tokens matter has been the biggest challenge behind it, where I wanted to add those occasional little life gain triggers, because there's a bit of life gain in here. There's like lifelink and various life gain triggers when creatures enter the battlefield, gain life, whatever. Plus you have the built-in food. I'm trying to build in that overlap with the life gain. But I'm also trying to overlap the fact of these tokens matters, and trying to make those tokens feel impactful when they hit the board, rather than just existing as a thing to gain life.
I would agree with that.
Makes sense.
Another one, too, besides the food that's become prevalent, there's a couple of things that they put forward in this set, was actually the party mechanic was heavily supported, if not said, directly. There's still a lot of cards in here that support your present party mechanic that you support in the Fae Cube.
I was actually going to say, we talked about this just while we were pre-gaming, is that there's so much extra support now because of the types that are now included multiple times on the same card, which just allows for so much of an expansion with the party mechanic as well.
Which includes clerics, rogues, warriors, and wizards. Following that D&D set,
well,
right?
cleric, rogue, warriors, and maze, because maze taken the
maze,
wizard.
yep.
So we're going to that's what we're going to call it.
But to give context, it didn't come out with the D&D set. It came out with Zendikar Rising.
You are correct.
And
which was odd, by the way.
The reason why I added party into this context, even though Zendikar Rising, that doesn't seem very fairy tale-esque, well, it's because Morningtide and introduce those subtypes as a thing that matters, and the other cornerstone of my environment are the Lorewing cards. And what party does as a subtype enabler is something that no other mechanic replaces, because it overlaps 4 different subtypes in a way that other sets have tried to do but failed. And when you look back at like how Lorwyn struggled as a set in terms of its drafting environment, etc., the biggest issue with typal themes is that they don't have a lot of overlap, and they put your drafter a lot on rails. Party opens up those subtypes in a way that's creative, inventive, etc. If you end up trying to draft wizards and somebody else tries to also draft wizards, right, then you don't have to give up on those wizards that you drafted. just because you're no longer in that lane, now you can switch over to the party lane and take advantage of the things that you've already drafted instead of keep fighting for those pieces. Or in the other context of, oh, you were trying to draft one thing, but you decided to draft a different thing, or these are the pieces that just ended up coming your direction anyways. And Party lets us blend those secondary subtypes in a very organic way that makes it so that way we can care about the primary subtypes, goblins, fairies, humans, whatever, and then care about the secondaries, which are the kind of classes, if you will. And while it doesn't make thematic sense in the top-down theme of, hey, this isn't very fairy tale, it makes sense in the grander scheme of Lorwyn and Morningtide are important parts of this set. And making subtypes matter in this environment is really, really important. So
besides food and besides enhancing the party mechanic without actually putting it on paper, right? The adventure mechanic came back.
Love adventure.
Which is typically a instant or sorcery attached to a creature that you put into exile when you cast the instant or sorcery, and then later cast a secondary cost if you wish to bring it back as a creature, or you can just choose to cast a creature.
Yep.
Huge fan of that modal type aspect of cards. So much so that even a card that may cost 7 on the creature side that may not look so great, suddenly you look on the left-hand side and they have a
2 CMC instant.
That's absolutely amazing.
Yep.
And what I saw they did this time around is they did multicolored adventures. Had they done that previously? That was different, right? Before they were in the same lane.
That's brand new.
Yep.
I think that's brand new. Yeah.
That is a whole new level. So before we even really dive into that any deeper, as you look at those, are you going to evaluate them as their instant and sorcery or the creature, or are you going to try to put them in a gold slot if you add them?
So when I add them, they're not taking a gold slot, period. Because when people are trying to play these cards, they're either going to be trying to play for one half or the other, or both halves. And you kind of treat them in the same way as hybrid cards in a way, where, sure, say if we have a Selesnya hybrid card, that sure, you could play this Selesnya card in the Selesnya deck, but you could also play it in mono white, or you could play it in mono green. And you kind of have to treat any of those adventure cards in the same lane. And I will note with the Fae Cube is that it is very easy to end up in 3-color decks, and that is by design. So being able to enable some of these adventures and the creature payoffs is pretty easy to do. So turning your Rakdos goblins into, say, Jund goblins isn't so far of a step away.
So as we move into Wilds of Eldraine, I was looking at your TLDR and your recent updates because I know you want to do very managed updates so that you're not, you have a lot of followers and you don't want to keep upsetting the Fae Cube and unstabilizing it for other players that are trying to clone it and copy it. I get that. I respect that. A lot of eyes on it, right? But you recently did a land cycler package. Do you want to talk about that, please, and what your intent was, your design goals?
Sure. So this is a decision that I thought about since Lord of the Rings came out. And essentially they came out with a cycle of land cycling for 1. And that's a big deal. That is the equivalent of having an Evolving Wilds with a creature stapled on. And it's been a point of contention for me because Lord of the Rings, it is an important piece of fiction, and it has a very large following. It's not what the Fae Cube is, so when I include these cards, they have to be very responsible with their inclusion because it's not what the Fae Cube's trying to represent, but it also tends to tie in a lot of these themes while being adjacent enough to my storytelling whatnot that it's interesting and engaging. And sometimes you have to make those decisions based on gameplay. So when I was going to make this decision, I've been considering the land package specifically from Dominaria United. And they are a bunch of lands that come in tapped, but they have 2 land types, and they're commons. I have been considering on those for a while just because introducing kind of lands matters themes into cubes is interesting and cool and engaging. But I haven't had a reason to move it into the Fae Cube because we haven't really had a way to do it to grab those on a budget and make those matter. And the gain lands that I used to have filled that role well enough that I didn't have a reason to swap. But after careful consideration with the land cycler package, I already support cycling just as not really sub-theme, but like as a mechanic in this cube. So it wasn't too far removed for me to take all these land cyclers and put them into the cube, because a lot of these land cyclers happen to organically fit into what all these colors are already doing. So that it was very full and responsible when I did add it in, even if it wasn't particularly the flavor that I was wanting to have.
I will take them. Like, I value them quite highly in a cube like this and when I'm drafting, because, as I've spoken about many times on other episodes, I love cards that have the ability to fill 2 roles, right? And this could be, I just want to take this card and I want to dump it and I want to get a land. Job done. That's all I need to get out of this card. But it also fills that need of potentially filling in a top end slot that I might need. So from this kind of, like, I think this adds a nice extra level of consistency, both at the very low end, the utility end, and also because a lot of these have got quite a high CMC requirement, right? The casting cost can be quite high. So they fill a nice spot for me. I like them.
And the cards we're referring to are Eagles of the North, Lauren Revealed, Troll of Khazad-dûm.
Khazad-dûm.
Yep, we'll get it close enough. Oliphant and Generous Int. And I do know that a lot of Pauper players rejoiced here, and Peasant players, or Cube Curators, excuse me, they rejoiced because you could then fetch out the dual common lands that came out recently that have actual types on them. So it can fetch types, i.e. the Troll of Khazad-dûm can actually fetch out a swamp specifically, and it makes it really powerful. So it does play a really light role as a fetch, but you can also pitch it to your yard to get that, cycle it out, and it has swamp cycling on it, and then you can go and reanimate it later. Different. So it's these cards are very powerful, and I know that our good friend Samich added most of these, if not all of them, to his environments that were lower powered.
They're great fixing.
They're fantastic.
They're great fixing. Being able to go, like you said, those lands that have those 2 types, that's incredible value to be able to get from a card that can also, like,
and they're seeing some competitive play as well too. I've seen that where
they are
trying to find the
living end, living death. One of those. I mean, they've recently, like, any card like that, you just put a couple of lands out, just start dumping those in. Now you're getting more lands and filling the graveyard with big creatures, which is exactly what you want. So they kind of work perfectly for an archetype like that.
So some of the other changes you did, and we're going to talk about this one extensively, we'll just kind of jump to it, is Riptide Laboratory.
Yeah, this was taken out for Wanderer's Twig. And tell us about your comments in the primer, because you say this is a bit of a flavor fail? ?
So Riptide Laboratory obviously is like this sort of studious laboratory that a bunch of wizards on Dominaria are using for research, etc. And it is very explicitly a Dominaria type land, which isn't quite the flavor that I'm going for, but it kind of adjacently goes with the DMU lands that I already have. I already have some of these kind of soft themes with this technology anyways, but ultimately Riptide Laboratory is more of a functional role than it is a flavor role, and sometimes you just gotta bite the bullet for what makes good gameplay, because the overall experience in Flavor of the Cube is not going to be negatively impacted because, ooh, a mystical laboratory exists. Like, we have this in Legend of Zelda, of like a laboratory that people were just, this one wizard guy, I can't remember his name, but he was literally studying the ocean of Lake Hylia. Like, that is a very fantasy thing. It's not so far removed that I'm willing to not bend for it.
That's fair.
So Riptide Laboratory, for those that aren't familiar, I believe they reprinted it in, is this Modern Horizons?
This one's from Modern Horizons too, that we're going to have on the show.
It's a land that taps for 1 colorless, and then you can also tap 1 colorless or 1 generic, and a island tap, return target wizard you control to its owner's hand.
This card's nuts.
The one thing
I'm just going to put this right out there. This card's nuts.
Yeah, it's busted. But the one thing that does qualify for the Fae Cube, and I don't know if you caught this in this particular art, but I wanted to point it out, that in the art that you have provided inside of your cube, it has Dr. Seuss's 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish. Literally.
Does it?
You see it? Look at the art.
It does. I'll take it.
So now
I'll
it actually flavor pass. So we have concerns about this card. I in particular have some and I actually ran your numbers on wizards, and I actually protested when you added this in to begin with.
Oh, you did?
I did. And of your 466, you have 33 wizards. But I'm going to redact my statement a little bit. At first, I was looking at it as abusing ETBs. right? I was thinking that because this environment's slow enough that I could do an Archaeomancer loop.
I will look at it, all right? I'm going to step in. I will look at this as being able to abuse ETBs, because I love to abuse ETBs. But you know what I also like to do? I like to be able to protect my creatures at instant speed. I like to be able to, what are you trying to do to my wizard there? Hey, hands off. I'm going to Riptide that right back to my hand, and then I get the ETB on top of it, which is, look, wizards, blue cards, love me some blue cards, love me some wizards. This has got the ability to make your wizards just nigh on impossible to get off the battlefield.
As my challenge point, you have Riptide Laboratory in here, which allows me to break your Archaeomancer over and over again. Any thoughts about that, May?
So here is my counter argument for why it should be included and why it's okay to be included. As you've noted before, that this environment is a little slower than you would expect. However, not only are you paying the 1 in the blue to protect your wizard or loop your ETBs or whatever you're trying to do, that is an additional 2 mana that you're having to pay on top of whatever your wizards are, and none of the wizards that are valuable enough to bounce or save are cheap enough that it matters. Like, if you had a bunch of 2 and 3 drop wizards that are dangerous and impactful in this environment, then yeah, sure, Riptide would be a problem. But the main one is like Una, but paying effectively 8 mana every turn to play Una, protect your Una, is rough. And that's like the biggest example that I can think of, because Una's a great win con in this environment. And when you build a deck specifically around bringing out Una, winning the game, etc., and then having, say, Riptide Laboratory to bring it back, a lot of mana at that point, and the game needs to end when you're at that much mana.
What about something like Pondering Mage? Right?
Sure. 7 mana. Because you're paying 5 for the mage, right? Has
that
no
built-in evasion or anything. And then you're paying an additional 2 to potentially bounce it back, hold up counterspell, etc.
Exactly. Like,
once you're at 7 mana, you should be thinking about how you're closing the game anyways.
I don't disagree, but I'm not necessarily as worried about like doing it on the same turn. Yeah, sure. If I'm having to protect it on the same turn, then it's a little unfortunate. But I'm also thinking I can play this card for 5. I can look at the top 3 cards. It's Ponder basically, right? So it's 3 colorless and 2 blue for a human wizard 3/4 with Ponder attached to it on the ETB. I don't know if I'm necessarily as concerned about having to protect it on that turn. If a creature gets killed that way, okay, sure. Then I go on and I play the next wizard. That's a pretty impactful one because it has an amazing ETB effect, and it's a decent size. Absolutely. I did draft it. I drafted it for a good reason. It's powerful. But is that the only... Like, look, what about Windrider Wizard or, Overwhelmed Apprentice, or Spellstutter Sprite, right? We talked about that as well. I think there's a lot of very, very strong wizards that I am going to be disappointed if they get killed before I get a chance to use the Riptide Laboratory. But once I get a wizard that's powerful that I can stick for a turn cycle, that's going to be quite a strong effect to get around for my opponent.
And one more counterpoint is in the original episode when we first talked about the Fae Cube, I kind of poo-pooed on Cruel Ultimatum at the time and said that your mana wouldn't be able to do it. Not even a couple of weeks later, when our good friend Christian built the Fae Cube, I pulled off Cruel Ultimatum multiple times in a game, looping it, right? For a card that had impossible mana to farm up, because your environment is slow enough that I was able to build the thing. Apologies again for the umpteenth time. But I would argue the same thing with Riptide Laboratory as a final push here on this, is that mana achievement's not very hard to do in this environment, because the games are slow enough. If you're not getting pressured, I will, as a person being completely honest, attempt to break this card. And I thought it was best to flag it now.
So, I think the scariest thing that you can combine it with would be the Spellstutter Sprite. Because with Spellstutter Sprite particularly, spending 4 mana, Spellstutter Sprite doesn't quite have a way to answer. But what's neat about Riptide Laboratory is because it is so powerful and it does pull people into the wizard lane, it was exactly what I needed for that role. Because as of that update, I got a lot of comments and a lot of feedback about wizards' kind of existence in the cube. And their issue was that while there was a lot of support and there's like a wizard cycling card, there's a bunch of really cool wizards, there wasn't really a wizard payoff, and Riptide Laboratory turns your wizards into an engine, and I think that that is an interesting build direction that I would like to see developed. If it ends up being a problem, it's something that I could explore later to be removed, but I think that in the current state of the metagame, that by the time that this thing establishes to be a problem, other decks are also doing scary things around that time. So we'll see if it's a problem. I'm going to keep an eye on it, but I think that what it does is worth exploring.
I agree, but I will say I am going to force the heck out of that the next time I draft at CubeCon. Super excited. If for nothing else, it looks like a super cool and fun way to play a deck in your cube, right? I like the wizards. I like getting the repetitive value. So, I'm excited.
The assault of redfish, two fish, all that. The assault on Dr. Seuss's laboratory is now over. So May made a wish, right? Your fairy godmother looked up one night, saw your star, made your wish.
Sure.
And May said,
Please, fairy godmother, please, let me have a Fae Lord.
and
For my Fae Cube, please.
May, would you mind telling us about this first wish that came through?
So I will note that it ended up being in actual, like, Wizards employees' comments where they're like, hey, what are the kinds of things that you're looking for in the next Eldraine, next Lorwyn, etc.? And I've responded to each of those, being like, where's my Fairy Lord? I want to play a real Fairy Lord, please. And we got 3 of them with Wilds of Eldraine, but one of them I'm actually interested in the Fae Cube. It's Obrira, the Dreaming Duelist. He is a blue and a black fairy warrior, 2/2 with flash and flying. Already face value, very, very playable. And whenever another fairy enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life. That is a fantastic lord.
I can't wait to draft fairy wizards with Riptide Laboratory and just keep bouncing fairy wizards.
This is a warrior, though, so we don't get to do that here. Let's don't start breaking Riptide just yet.
Well, I'm going to bounce fairy wizards, not just wizards.
We're so excited about breaking the laboratory.
Oh, I'm really excited for it, too. I hope you do. And what's really nice is that we haven't really had a fairy warrior before. We've had fairy rogues, we've had fairy wizards, we've had like fairy artificers, whatnot, but we haven't really had a fairy warrior yet, and he fits that slot perfectly. On face value, just a 2/2 with flash flying that can just come in. A bear with flash flying is very relevant.
I can't fly.
One of the key aspects for these type of themes, one of the key aspects for these type of themes is making sure that it is playable enough at face value that people are willing to play it outside of its typal deck. And this does its role.
No one's going to complain about a 2/2 with flash that flies and hits for 2. I couldn't agree more. I think this card is bananas, and I love it. Flavor, art, like I think it's almost a little undercosted, just black blue for what you're getting out of it. But I think it's incredibly good.
All right, so May put a wish up to the fairy godmother, and the fairy godmother presented a bunch of gifts, and not all the gifts came to fruition, correct, May? And one of these was Tegwill's Scouring. And for 4 colorless and 2 swamps, you get a sorcery. You may cast Tegwill's Scouring as though it had flash by tapping 3 untapped creatures you control with flying, in addition to paying its other cost. Destroy all creatures. Create 3 1/1 black fairy rogue creature tokens with flying. Now, the fairy godmother giveth, and the fairy godmother taketh away. May, would you mind explaining why this is not going into the environment?
Because this looks perfect. It looks so good.
Oh,
Why
it
aren't
is
you
perfect.
including it?
It's great. The problem is I got what I asked for, not what I wanted. So it is 6 mana board wipe that you can cast at instant speed. Fantastic. Plus it makes 3 flyer, specifically flying fairy rogues, which is fantastic. I love seeing those tokens pop up. But the card is $5. I'm hoping that it gets less attention over time, but the biggest issue is that it's coming with the precon, and the precon's really good, and I'm not sure if that price is ever really going to come down. So
I would agree, and the reason is, even though I've played Magic for long enough that board wipes are kind of, I look at them in that 4 mana, Preem Verdict and so on and so forth. This is 6 mana, which is, I don't want to say in the unplayable, but it's certainly in the lower power when it comes to a board wipe because of that additional mana cost. But the fact that it has flash on it is the reason why, unfortunately, I'm very sorry, but I don't see this card coming down in popularity or demand unless it gets reprinted. The fact that you can do that at instant speed and get some board presence as well, it's very unfortunate. I think flavor-wise, it's incredible. Love the art. I think it would be wonderful for your cube, but I just don't see it coming down.
May, what if I buy this card for you and then I give you a bill of sale for $0?
You would have to buy that for everybody who copies this cube.
Exactly.
I got bad
Damn
news.
it.
How many clones we up to right now? It's about 500. So it's going to basically cost you about $1,500.
It's not bad. It's not bad.
I don't know how many because a lot of them went private.
So, May, there's another card on here that I adore. This art.
Oh, I love this one.
Would you mind telling the audience your other actual pick that I believe you can include? She's excited.
I can. It's Fairy Blade Crafter. It is 2 and a black for a Fairy Rogue, 2/2 flyer. And whenever one or more fairies you control deal combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on Fairy Blade Crafter. When it dies, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life where X is its power. So, there are 2 major reasons that I love this card. One is that it's another fairy payoff, and, well, sorry, there's 3 major reasons. One is that it's a fairy payoff. Secondly is that it involves a +1/+1 counters, which I have a specific card in black that puts +1/+1 counters on rogues when they enter, and when things with +1/+1 counters deal damage, then they discard a card. And third is that it fills my 3 mana slot, which has been lacking. It fits a very particular niche in my cube that I have needed for so long. Is just, I need a Windrake fairy in here. So,
and the art looks like my teenage son today who's going to school tomorrow, and he's super not excited. The emo just like, burr. It's really going on.
Fairy Blade Crafter is like waiting outside a Fallout Boy concert or something like that. It does feel like
I love
that fairy does not look
They are
happy
a
with
menace.
life. Yeah. It needs menace. That's what it needs. It needs menace. This creature, flying menace for 2 and a black.
Fallout Boy.
Tell us about the next one in the list, right? So this one, I actually love the art on this one.
As May claps.
I know. So where, just tell us from the top, where does this fit? Why? And tell me why I should love that third ability so much.
So Stingblade Assassin is a 3 and a black for a Fairy Assassin, flash flying 3/1, which face value, playing 4 mana for a flash flyer 3/1 is pretty good rate.
It's awesome.
In limited, it's a fantastic rate. That's playable on its own. But this third effect that has been experimented with a long time, we've had a lot of variations of these effects that I have not included in any other cube. This is going to be the first and probably going to be the only. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature an opponent controls that was dealt damage this turn. Obviously, Ravenous Chupacabra is the king of, hey, it's 4 mana creature, enters the battlefield, destroys target creature. But Chupacabra doesn't belong in the Fae Cube. Stingblade Assassin is our 4-drop fairy that is a 3/1, turns sideways, just on face value, perfect card. And you can sometimes just what's the word I'm looking for?
Merc.
Yes, thank you. Just completely destroy somebody's creature, and it's going to feel so good in this environment. It may not be a rogue, but it doesn't have to be because of what it does.
And it's kind of got those Massacre Girl vibes. I love it. I love this art so much.
Oh yeah, I dig it.
Oh, I'm thinking about, I might add this to the fam. This is absolutely gorgeous.
Oh, it's phenomenal. And again, right, seems to be a common theme that we're talking about with these cards. 4 mana for a 3 power flash flyer is such incredible value. I love that third ability because I'm always looking for the gravy, right? I love my roast chicken. I love my steamed vegetables, but I want the gravy. And that is just a little bit of gravy on something that already has so much impact, to the ability to be impactful. You know, I want to put it down. I'm happy to put this down on turn 4, even if it's not impacting the board right away. I'm not destroying necessarily a creature. I don't have to. I'm not drawing a card. But the fact that I'm immediately getting this 3/1 flyer and I have the potential to destroy a creature, I love it. Love it so much.
So all right. I do love the fact that this is an evolution of not only that trend of cards, but there was literally a card that came out in, I think it was Baldur's Gate, and it was just Manticore. And it's basically the same card as this, but it's a 2/1 flash flyer. That one extra power makes it playable.
Yes.
And I love that.
And Chupacabra is a 2/2. It's on the ground.
Oh, yeah.
I'd much rather have a 3/1. It flies. It's such a strong aggro card.
Love
as well.
it.
All right.
Great card.
I want to talk about this next one because we're onto some blue cards, and everybody knows I love blue cards. Tell us about, and I'm just going to, the name of this is Into the Fae Court. Tell us about this one and why, to me, this is, I would say, in all the cards that we've got in our show notes, and again, to all of our listeners, please go and check out the show notes in the socials. This, for me, is like top 3 quintessential cards for this cube. I love it so much.
I have no idea how I'm going to fit it in.
But you
I'm
will.
going to fit it in. I will. It's going in somehow, some way. It is 3 blue sorcery, draw 3 cards, which it's an okay rate for draw 3 cards. But you also get to create a 1/1 blue fairy creature token with flying, and it can only block creatures with flying. I don't like that it introduces a new fairy type, a new fairy token, I guess. But being able to draw 3 cards and make a fairy is a really good value at 5 mana, and anything that can make fairies on the sorceries or instance is something that I'm interested in including. And even though it is a new, like a 3rd fairy token for me to care about, it does an important role.
You bring up a good point, too. Me as a curator, when I'm evaluating cards, like recently with Uberbear's Artifact Cube, I'm looking at a lot of cards that have come out recently, even in this set, and it may say that it's making a 1/1 human, or it's making a spirit, or whatever in the recent sets. And I just don't want to increase the volume of tokens. So sometimes a card does not go in, or the token has a special ability. And I want to do a plug for our good friend John Terrell from Cultic Cube.
That's right.
The Cultic Bestiary. If you have these oddball, interesting tokens, a lot of times I go straight to John.
Yes.
I go to the Cultic Bestiary. I order them from his Etsy site, and I get what I need, right? Because a lot of times these are going to be chase cards and hard to find if you didn't open up in packs. And on that note, too, I just want to limit the volume of tokens. It creates just this, it stops the game a lot of times. Like, hey, I need this token, Anthony, I need this token. We did it recently. We went to our charity event, and I'm the token guy running around just passing out tokens. It inhibited play a little bit. Yeah, it's a little exhausting. I do miss the days of the basic tokens. I really do.
I will also note that when it comes to my environment is that I have all the tokens actually in sleeves. So that way when it comes up, I don't have to pull out my Infinity tokens. Great product, but not sponsored, just a great product.
But it could be.
I like having the physical tokens. And it is difficult when we have unique tokens like this because it introduces new tokens into my environment that now I have to have into my Fae Cube container as well. And when it comes to adding a lot of token complexity, and I have made a specific rule for the Fae Cube of I only want 10 tokens. I am not going to break more than 10 tokens because it reduces the complexity. It makes it so that way the tokens that we see are kind of understood amongst all the players because you're going to see the same tokens, whether or not you're playing it or your opponent's playing it. And having that consistency is important, even though some of the variations are things like Goblin versus Goblin Rogue, Fairy versus Fairy Rogue. And it's one of the big reasons why I didn't include a lot of the role cards from this set. All the role cards would be fantastic in this cube, but it's not a mechanic that I'm interested in including because I already have so many tokens that I don't want to introduce another one on top of that. So even though this introduces a new token, I think what it does is valuable enough for my environment that it is worth including.
Yeah.
Cultic Bestiary. Do a search for it, and you can find any interesting token you want.
And John's tokens are incredible. They're beautifully made. John really does have like his own way of creating them, and the art that's on them, and the text that's on them. They're just very classically created. I love them. I've got a bunch of them.
They're conversation starters for sure. If you're going to pass out tokens, might as well talk about them.
The reason why, and I will say, going back to Into the Fae Court, the reason why I like this is it is a draw 3. Even if this was one CMC less, potentially even 2 CMC less and only draw 2 cards and create the fairy token. I don't know if I would quite love it as much, but the fact that it does draw the 3 cards and create the token, it can only block creatures with flying, but we'll get to the next card in a second, but going back to the Stingblade Assassin, that's a 3/1 flyer. 3 power is a lot. That can end games very quickly. Now you've got a way to be able to deal with that. And also with the next card, May, tell us about the next card, and this one can also deal with that.
Mocking Sprite. It is 2 and a blue for a 2/1 flying fairy rogue, and all instants and sorceries you cast cost 1 less.
Love that.
And I love those cost reduction effects. I think they're fantastic. They work with the adventures, they work with your spell slinging stuff, and it's a fairy rogue. There's not a lot else to say here outside of it's a pretty perfect fit for my environment.
And the next one you have on your list, this one's ridiculous, and it's Obira's Attendant. It's for 4 colorless and an island. You get a creature, fairy wizard, 3/4 on the non-adventure side, but you also get the adventure portion, which I love, is Desperate Party. For 1 colorless and a blue, you get an instant adventure. Target creature gets -4, -0 until the end of turn. And then you do the adventure and you push it out. But like that ability to shut down combat or to do a combat trick on top of a 3/4 flyer for 5 is ridiculous. I mean, it's funny how, and this is a common, that's what's really interesting. We talked about the power creep on our Power on the Horizon episode, and this is just further expands that idea. Now we've got these modal cards that do the thing. If you think about the way back when, you paid that for a 3/4 vanilla flyer for 5, and it would have had 2 blue in it, right?
Yeah. And I would say,
crazy.
based on like just viewing the list in general, that -4 on the power for Desperate Parry really does seem to hit a sweet spot for a lot of those, not absolutely at the top end, but moving towards the top end of the creatures that are in your cube, right? And especially with the fairies that seem to have a lot of like the power, like at least a couple higher than the toughness, if not 1 or 2. This just seems to fit really nicely.
And what's really important is this is a wizard, so you could bounce this with your laboratory.
Riptide Laboratory, my 3/4 flyer.
Yeah, and then keep doing this Desperate Party.
Looks good.
Yep, let's go.
So, I will make a quick correction because I was apparently thinking of the wrong fairy lord. Obira is one of the women of the 3, and I was thinking of the third one, which is the face of the precon. My mistake. Obira is a woman. My bad, because this card does remind me of it in the flavor text. But when it comes to weakened effects in cube environments, is that they find really, really difficult places to fit in because of what they provide is usually not strong enough for what is being thrown at you. But in this environment, it is important for not only keeping aggro down in the early stages so that we can get to the point of playing Obira's Attendant, but it is also not costing you a card to weaken. All it's costing you is tempo. But being able to pay 2, shut down somebody's attack for a turn, can feel pretty good.
Beautiful blue effect.
Absolutely.
Always happy to see something like that in blue, where I can, a 4-point life swing in the mid game can be so significant, and then maybe in the next turn or 2, I get to slam a big flyer of my own. Like I'm pretty happy about that.
I wanted more relevant 5-drop fairies and wizards, so look, here we are. This is exactly what I want. It's an adventure, it's a fairy, it's a wizard.
Let's pour one out for pacifism. Stu, would you mind taking this one away?
Yeah, so, pacifism, what happened to you? So, this next one is Cooped Up. This is another common, and something else, I want to touch on this very quickly. The power of the commons and the uncommons in this set is just absolutely off the charts. And this one, I think, is a great example of it. So, Cooped Up, 1 colorless, 1 white, enchantment aura, enchant creature, enchanted creature can't attack or block. But it doesn't stop there. It also has 2 colorless and a white, exile, enchanted creature. This is... like you say, RIP to pacifism. Like it's 2 colors to shut down, or 2 CMC, 1 colorless, 1 white to shut down your
2 mana value.
Yeah, 2 CMC to shut down your opponent's strongest creature or whatever you feel is the biggest threat. Like that's such great value for a card.
So the thing with this card is that I actually have a very specific replacement that I'm making here because of the amount of fairies that are getting introduced to the environment finally. Cooped Up actually hits those fairies, as the flavor suggests. And I'm swapping it out for Trapped in a Tower, which very specifically says non-flying creature can't attack or block. And it's been a problem before where White really wanted to answer some of those fairies so that way they can kind of keep up with their ground presence or slow down the game enough so that way they can get back to their payoffs, right? And Cooped Up is a really cool way of introducing that pacifism effect in a very flavorful way while also giving a mana dump for later to just get rid of the creature entirely. And what I really like about this is that it introduces improved removal that I already had.
And it also plays into Pauper and Peasant environments. This card is very powerful. It manages a lot of different threats. That's what I'm a huge fan of this, right?
And also important to remember that it doesn't stop activated abilities. It doesn't stop tap abilities.
It's not a rest.
It doesn't stop static abilities.
Yep.
You know, it does something like that is still very relevant. Going back to those reduction effects that are on some of the other fairies. So, but yeah, I agree. The fact that you can just play this for 2 and then exile it at will,
right?
It's such a really cool effect. Let's talk about the next one. I'm actually going to go down to the other white card, and the reason why I want to talk about this is because the art is absolutely what I would expect to see, unlike some old school Brothers Grimm fairy tales.
It's very John Terrell's Cultic Bestiary.
Yes, it is.
Right?
Yes, it is. So tell us about this. Is a saga. How many sagas do you have in your Fae Cube? Is this potentially the first one?
This is going to be one of the first sagas we're going to have in the environment. Sagas are something I've wanted to include for so long because they fit the flavor and they're a mechanic that I'm interested in because they tie in that flavor. But there haven't been any sagas that match the thematic flavor of the Fae Cube. And Eldraine coming back and bringing back these sagas for Eldraine felt so good. It felt like it was too long. My only complaint is that there is a lot of sagas that involve tokens that I just don't want to bother with. So I don't have a huge selection of sagas that I'm adding, but I get to add a couple, and that makes my day. The Princess Takes Flight is 2 and a white for a saga. As it enters, after you draw a step, you can add a lore counter, sacrifice it after 3. Obviously, the saga thing. Exile up to 1 target creature. Target creature you control gets +2/+2 and gains flying, and then return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So it does twofold things. You can use it to enable these ETB effects that you care about as a way to like slow flicker, because Blink itself is not, what's the word I'm looking for? It is not aggressively supported like it is in a lot of cubes, but it is a thing that you can do, but it's in a very slow fashion, and Princess Takes Flight lets you take an advantage of that. Or you can remove an opponent's thing for a turn, and for a couple turns actually, and it can be a really valuable way to just remove something that's a problem for the moment while also giving you some offensive pressure. Plus the art is just so good.
The art is incredible. And I will say it's interesting that you mentioned that. I looked, when I saw this card, I immediately looked at it as a card that I'm looking to exile and then bring back my own creature, which is odd because I typically look at white as a very aggro-centric deck, right? I'm trying to squeeze the damage in. I'm trying to play the taxi creatures and the slightly undervalued creatures. So it almost makes more sense that when you play that and you get to exile that creature when Chapter 1 resolves, that you are trying to exile an opponent's creature and trying to squeeze damage through. But for some reason, I'm still looking at this as I want to exile one of my own creatures, and maybe I'm just looking at within the scope of your cube. And like you say, is it as supported? And maybe this is just better suited to a multicolored deck than the more mono whitey kind of, hate bears or Staxy kind of decks that I'm typically looking to draft.
When I'm looking at this, I'm thinking of the Champion decks, where Champion was a specific mechanic that came out with Lorwyn, where it is that slow flicker effect, where when your creature enters, you have to exile something of that type. Or with the case of some of the changelings, you just exile another creature. And when that creature leaves play, then you return that creature back into play. And I like it because it gives you that value assurance for some of your top end cards in a way that feels, what's the word I'm looking for? Fair? Slow? Because
we'll
like
say fair.
Blink as,
we'll say fair.
Yeah. I like Blink as an archetype. It's not that I dislike Blink. It's just not the archetype that I'm looking to make very fast in the Fae Cube. The Fae Cube is a slow environment. I'm not looking for a bunch of cubes. I'm not looking for a bunch of ways to quickly flicker out a bunch of these ETB effects and get a bunch of value out of nowhere. I'm looking for that slow burn of, I could spend my mana to do creatures, I could spend my mana to do removal, and a lot of these micro decisions, and Princess Takes Flight really takes advantage of those player decisions because it has that modality built in.
And the fact that it's the third chapter versus the first chapter, right? You exile it in the first chapter, you now have to wait 2 more turns, right? It's not the next turn's main phase, it's the turn after that first main phase when you get that creature back. So it is, I think it does still fit the speed quite nicely because it is a little on the slow side. I don't know. I just think it's really, really cool. And only 3 mana. So you now have, your second turn. Maybe you don't have to play this on turn 3. Maybe you play it on turn 4. You've got some good value creatures in that 3-drop range that you can blink on turn 4 and then get back on turn 5 or 6 or turn 6 or 7, maybe. So, but either way, I think just the art and the style of the card and the fact that it does give you that sort of delayed value, I think it's awesome. I love it.
I love it. Big fan of it.
And I want to throw the proverbial curveball. It's more of the on-the-spot question. As we move through these potential changes, our cutoff for CubeCon 2023 is September the 12th, 2023. And as you're looking at this list, are you going to make immediate decisions, or are you play testing prior to find out if these are going into the cube before September the 12th?
So, a lot of the cards that I'm deciding on fit roles that I already happen to need and take out cards that were already unimpressive. So, a big reason that I've been on the fence when it comes to immediately slapping in on the Wilds of Eldraine cards is that I don't like making immediate changes. I like to put them on the maybe board, think about it for a bit, and then come back to those changes in a month. However, a lot of it comes down to the looming pressure that CubeCon is going to be coming up soon. We have a hard cutoff of when our lists have to be submitted, and when it comes to making these changes, I would rather have them sit in my maybe board and I can digest them and kind of consider them, maybe talk about it in Tumblr or in my blog post or whatever of kind of the things that I'm considering, get some feedback, etc. And normally I make the playtest I take playtest data and then make my decisions. This is going to be a case where I'm having to jump into a bunch of these changes because a lot of these changes fit very specific niches that I was needing for a long time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I feel the same pressure. I'm not changing UberBear's Horror Cube, but UberBear's Artifact Cube is getting some minor changes that we'll talk about in a future episode. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about is, early on, I said the weaponization of food. And I know that you said that sometimes the food cards did not align with your design philosophies. But I want to talk about the card Welcome to Sweet Tooth. For 1 colorless and 1 green, you get for, I guess it's a saga again. You got the sagas. You were excited about that. But number 1 was create a 1/1 white human creature token. Number 2, create a food token. And then number 3 was the weaponization part that I was excited about, right? It actually does something with the food tokens besides the 3 life. Put X 1/1 counters on target creature you control, where X is 1 plus the number of food tokens you control. The weaponization has now occurred. And I wanted to ask if early on in one of our original episodes, when we talked about the Fae Cube, you were testing a weaponization of the food package, right? Finally, you got a card that starts making this something besides gain 3 life. What are your thoughts on this card?
I'm super excited about it. Face value, pay 2 mana, get 2 different tokens. That's so good. It feels so good. But having those 2 tokens be things that I'm actually already including feels even better. And having that food payoff there is just the icing on the cake, pun intended. And again, with sagas, I'm looking to add any of these sagas that I can. I'm still on the fence about whether or not I want to include roles just because token complexity, as we mentioned before. But when it came to this saga, it was pretty much a slam dunk because it does 3 different things that I was needing. Where I needed more human creature tokens, I needed more food, and I needed a food payoff. This is all 3 built in 1. This is exactly what I'm looking for.
And it's got a giant
almost
cake.
Makes me want to put Curious Pair back in because I've regretted taking Curious Pair out. It was easily one of my favorite cards in terms of aesthetic, but nobody was drafting it, and I'm hoping that with inclusions like these, Curious Pair might be able to make its way back in.
Okay, well, at CubeCon, I have an alternate art dated foil Curious Pair. It had the alternate art, like the fairy art, like I have one of those. It's yours. I will bring it.
Oh,
And it's cheap.
because I love it. It's one of my favorite
It's a
cards
cool
in
card.
Eldraine.
The art is incredible.
It's so good.
So
All right.
there was a card that you were super hype about in our Discord, and it's Archive Dragon. Would you mind telling the audience why you were so just like ecstatic about this card coming out, please?
First of all, it's a Dragon Wizard. I needed a 6-drop for this slot so badly. I was scraping for cards, and I know exactly what I'm going to replace. I have everything already planned out for where it's going, because I very specifically only had one 6-drop in this slot, and it's been bugging me this entire time because of its bad flavor. But this card is called Archive Dragon. It's 4 blue for a Dragon Wizard flying. It has flying, ward 2, and when it enters the battlefield, you scry 2. It is a 4/6 body, which, beautiful. Love that. But to give context for what I'm replacing, I'm going to be taking out my Angler Drake, which is 4 blue creature Drake flying. When it enters the battlefield, bounce target creature back to the owner's hand. It's a 4/4. Angler Drake's okay, but it was never really flavor that I was happy with. It was in there because of mechanical need, but this introduces 2 types I actually care about in a way that I actually care about, and it feels so good.
And it has that pseudo protection. That Ward 2 is perfectly acceptable. I love it.
So
Ward
good.
2, Ward 3 is maybe my personal limit before it starts becoming quote unquote protection, right? And you want to be mindful of that. We've talked about that. Hexproof, right? We've talked about this over and over again. But this card's really neat. Lets you scry, so lets you dig through your deck. I'm fascinated with this. I love this choice. The only thing I would have liked on it is Flash. I'm getting greedy.
Oh, if it had Flash,
You
that would have been
are
so nice.
out of your mind.
The greeds.
There's no way this can have
It would
Flash
have been
on.
wonderful.
I actually highlighted this card myself as well and I'm going to give a shout out to Samich, Chris Moore, our Pauper expert, peasant, Pauper and Peasant
and
expert.
our cube expert.
Cube expert,
Yeah, Samich makes my cubes better every
He
day.
does. As a potential in the Peasant Cube to replace another 6-drop that he has in his cube, which is Jetting Glasskite, which is a similar card in that it's a 6 mana, double blue, 4 colorless flyer. But it also has, whenever it becomes the target of a spell or ability for the first time in a turn, counter that spell or ability. But I think the fact that this has Ward 2 kind of fills that enough. But I really, really love the Scry 2. And one of the things that I love about, I think Scry is good across the board, right? But one of the reasons why I think it fits just as appropriately on a big 6-drop as it does on a 1-drop, by the time you're putting a 6-drop into play, and there's no Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, all that kind of stuff in the Fae Cube, like there is in the high-powered cubes. When I'm playing this on turn 6, I expect to have 6 mana, and at that point, I'm looking for action. I'm looking for the big splashy spells. I'm looking for the game changers. I'm looking for the game winners. I want to be able to scry 2 and put a couple of lands at the bottom of my deck, obviously, right? Yeah. So this now gives me...
It gets you gas.
It gets me gas. That's all I'm looking for when I've got 6 mana. It's all I want is gas. And this is a difficult to remove creature that hits very hard, that's got 6 toughness, is very, very difficult to get off the battlefield, and gives you a way to dig for, like you say, that additional gas. I absolutely love this card. And plus, not only is it a Dragon Wizard, it's a Dragon Wizard Bookworm. Because it's like Schmaug.
It's perfect for this environment.
Pile of books.
This is the card that I saw and I was like, this was made for me.
It's incredible.
I have this specific slot that I've been needing to fill, that I've had nothing to fill. And this is both a dragon and a party member, and it scries. It's everything.
It's baby Nicobolus reading books.
So, speaking of dragon wizards, I actually have a per curveball question for you.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Surprise. You thought you were going to give me all the curveballs this time.
Mm-hmm.
Another card that I've been considering adding that isn't from Wilds of Eldraine was Dragon Mage. So people who are experienced with the game probably know what this card is.
Let you
but
wheel,
I'm going
right?
to go ahead and say it anyways.
Yep.
It's 5 red for a 5/5 Dragon Wizard Flyer. When it deals combat damage to a player, each player discards their hand and draws 7 cards. I'm considering putting this in the Fae Cube for a few different reasons. It can fit in the land dump red, because it gives you a way so that way you can just churn out a bunch of your lands out of your hand, get a bunch of value. It also gives you a lot of your draw triggers for your Draw Matters cards. It's a dragon for your top end. It's also a party member, so it means that it's a great reanimation target with Thwart the Grave. And it's just a 5/5 flyer for 7.
And it pairs well with Riptide Laboratory.
And
It does.
It's like 30 cents.
Yeah. This
It's
card
30
really
cents.
fits.
It gives
It's
you a
just
wheel.
so
It
cheap.
gives
My
you a wheel
question
effect.
is, do you think that this is worth including in the
Yes.
environment?
Yes.
I do.
I do,
I
and
like
I'll-
wheel effects. You want to reload.
Exactly. I will say the reason why I like cards like this is because they are fun. Wheel effects are rarely unfun, in my opinion, unless I'm playing a deck where I either haven't been able to cast spells, which at that point, if you haven't, it's kind of on you and you've just built a crappy deck or you've kept a hand that you shouldn't. But wheeling effects are fun.
I think they're
right.
exciting.
People like to have their hands reloaded, even if it's at the cost of whatever they might have in their hand. I think it's amazing. And yes, I would be fully supportive of you adding Dragon Mage. Yes.
Great.
Do it.
Yeah, I'm all
Do
about
it by
it.
Having
September
2
12th.
dragon wizards. Let's go.
Yeah, it creates a whole.
Exactly.
It creates
Like,
a
why wouldn't you want
dynamic,
to include it?
and I would use this as a top end for an aggro or a Gruul deck, or a Spells Matter would want this to finish the game off.
Yes.
There's a lot of reasons why this card would actually make sense to me because I want to reload
It
my
fits
hand.
the environment.
Yeah,
Yes.
I agree. I think it's really neat, and something about like you've got kind of this sub breeding type effect with like the cards that are doing that we talked about the baby Nicol Bolas a minute ago. It's just neat to have cards that wheel, draw, learning, wizard. I like the kind of sub. I don't know. The intellectual dragons is kind of cool.
Also think about the big red as well. Like how much big red do you have on, like if I just wanted to draft a pure red or a red maybe with a light splash where I was focused hard on, I want to be able to even mulligan a little aggressively towards any kind of ramp, any kind of ability to play spells ahead of curve, and then be able to ultimately get this card out much earlier. It doesn't have to be turn 2. I don't expect it turn 2 or turn 3, but even if it's like turn 4 or even turn 5, now I'm turning my big splashy, powerful 5/5 flyer into the ability to reload my hand. And I will
note with
think
the
that's
upcoming update that I'm going to be doing is that a lot of those early game creatures are going to be moved up the curve. And playing Big Red has not been a deck that has come up yet, but it is a deck that I want to support. And it will be easier to put together when this next update comes out, because there are just a lot of good Big Red cards that are coming out with this that I am going to include.
Well, let's talk about the next one, because I think the next one kind of fits pretty perfectly on this big red, because it's just big and it's red.
Qualifiers matter.
That's my qualifiers. It's big and it's red. Why not?
Bueller.
I guess I'm saying it.
There
Yes,
you
you
go.
are.
It's called Bellowing Bruiser. It is 4 and a red for a creature ogre 4/4 with haste, but it has an adventure. You can pay 2 and a red to beat a path. Sorcery speed, up to 2 target creatures can't block this turn. So while none of the creature types are relevant here, this is another case where I've needed a 5-drop slot so bad that's just strong enough that it is good for the Fae Cube, but also just weak enough that it's not going to completely take over the game. This fits that role perfectly, where it is just a 4/4 hasty creature for red. I need that so bad, and earlier you can use it to just deny some blocks. I love that. It may not have relevant types, but I'm willing to forgive it for that very, very good adventure.
I kind of wish that this was up to 2 target creatures can't attack or block this turn.
A red fog.
What?
Yeah,
You making cards up now?
I'm making cards up.
There we go.
I tend to do that, but I kind of wish that
Balancing matters
because
in the game of
I'm
Magic
trying
Gathering.
to be like, getting up to my 5 and 6 and 7 mana. But I think this is a cool card, and I think Ogre is a favorite like creature type of mine.
I mean, if we're doing this, we're going to ask McDarby to continue with that red and green. We want a Gruul Fairy, right? I mean, we're going to keep putting this wish in. You've already got
No.
the other wish.
Is it fairy? I want my Is it fairy.
Is it
That's
fairy?
what I want. I'm still begging for it.
Is
Please
it?
give
Is
me
it?
Is it legendary fairy? I want it.
This
It'll
next
be
card,
my thing.
This next card is fantastic. So as you can, a lot of these are Pauper and Peasant type. This is what's really great.
This is another
as we
common.
do the Fae Cube stuff, right? We're also giving advice to the Pauper and Peasant listeners to evaluate these cards. These modal spells are significant for those environments.
I'm taking
Create a-
this next one
it's
so
good.
highly.
Well, go ahead and
If I'm
talk
in this
about it,
colour,
because this
I
thing is a tower. This
love
art is glorious.
Love these. So first of all, the art. Look at the size of the dragon that's on
scaling
this card.
is so great.
It's nuts. So this is Beanstalk Worm. It is
Love
a
it.
4 colorless, 1 green creature plant worm. Plant worm. right? Let's
Yeah,
first
why
of all
not,
digest that a little bit.
No.
It's a 5/4 with reach, but then it also has plant beans as a adventure sorcery. You may play an additional land this turn.
Love it.
I'm absolutely enamored with this card. It's a rampy card that also has a gigantic 5/4 huge green dragon, plant worm, sure, whatever you want to call it. It's awesome. It's rampant. It's just a big creature that I want to get into play.
It's kind of an explorer.
It's explore with a huge creature on top.
Yeah.
Like, what's not to love?
It's pretty gross.
It's amazing.
This is another card that felt like it was made for me.
Yes.
My 5-drop slot has been so difficult to fill for green because green needs scary for 3, 4, 5 drops. Period. They has to be scary at that point because that's when your ramp matters. And when we already have Beanstalk Giant, having Beanstalk Worm for that additional, hey, my adventures are also ramp cards is just so good. I love big dumb creatures that ramp themselves.
It's
so good. It feels good to play.
Yeah, it's a real green card. It's a really, really, really green card. It's ramp and a big creature. It has reach. It's wonderful. I love it so much.
It's everything I want and more.
Good.
All right, so I want to continue with this
Love.
weaponization of food thing, right? We're going to keep pressing food. Food can be dangerous, right? Hollow Scavenger for 2 colorless and 1 forest. You get a creature wolf, and it's a common again. This common peasant.
I'm telling
thing
you.
is just,
Commons are
it's
out
for
of
a
control.
3/2. It's a split card. It's an adventure here, but Bakery Raid for 1 forest. You get a sorcery adventure. Create a food token.
But what can the Hollow Scavenger do?
Exactly.
Tell us about.
Sacrifice a food. Hollow Scavenger gets +2/+2 until in the turn. Activate only once each turn. So you're looking at a 5/4. This is really good if you sacrifice a food token. This is fantastic. I love everything about this. Kind of does your big bad wolf type thing that you're looking for, I think, May.
Mm.
Yeah.
So wolves are an important archetype in this game. It is a very important type of theme. And it has been one of the major meta contenders for a long time because of how we finally have a wolf that ties in our food themes. But Hollow Scavenger is just a lot of things that I love. And it is a lot of things that I've experimented with. There was a wolf that I tried for a while back from AFR where it was just a 3-mana wolf, 2/2, and then you could drop mana and then it gets bigger. But you can only do it once per turn. And it's a thoroughly unimpressive mechanic for wolves, and it's unfortunately kind of that niche that they have in Limited. And this continues that theme while also introducing what I'm already supporting, giving me that food payoff, giving me another wolf, giving me more tokens. It does a lot of things that I like, and it is an auto-include in this environment, even if it doesn't have party. It's just delicious.
Chef's kiss. Then Dark Side of the Moon, lots of mushrooms. We got a Storm-Killed Vanguard. It is a lightning Viking riding a bear. I don't know what's happening. But for 4 colorless and 2 forest, you get a creature giant warrior. Makes more sense when it's giant warrior, I suppose.
Right.
6/7 on the one side, and then we have a sorcery on the other side, as we do with the adventures, which makes them great. Bear down, which is fantastic, right? Bear down. It's like
You love this because it says bear.
I do.
Let's
I call
be
dibs on this one.
It's bear.
But sorcery adventure, destroy target enchantment, so you get a naturalize effect, but sorcery speed, which is fantastic. But Storm-Killed Vanguard can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. A 6/7. That is nuts.
It's a big creature.
It is big.
It's a big creature
Love
with a
it.
good effect, especially now you're putting in some sagas, right? So now being able to destroy an enchantment is starting to get a little bit more relevant in the cube. So now you have a card that has the ability to do that and has this gigantic 6/70s. Monstrous,
We got
right? That's
Thor
gotta be
writing Paddington for no reason whatsoever. It's pretty great.
that is not Paddington. Paddington never looked like that. Okay, let's be real. And it's like Peter Pan is running away with his bright red hair,
Anytime
petrified.
that we can have a naturalize effect main deckable, it is something worth
It's wonderful.
considering.
That's what adventures
Because-
actually give you, right? They give you main
Yeah.
deckability of these modal cards. I
Yep.
love that so much.
It's so difficult having a bunch of these cards that you need to answer a bunch of these scarier cards and scarier artifacts, enchantments, etc. You need to have the answer, but main decking it does not feel good. And when you have something like these adventures where you could just tack it on, it feels better because the creature side of this is so good on its own that I'm genuinely excited for. And a specific note that I'll make with this card is while it may not be wolves or elves like the rest of green, it is a warrior, which is a Gruul subtype at the moment that has popped up several times. And having another warrior top end that's just hard to deal with that can close a game is exactly what I need from that slot, even though it's hotly contested slot.
It takes what I would consider to be potentially a sideboard card, right? Because there's plenty of times when, maybe not quite as worried about artifacts or enchantments out there, but it takes a card that has an ability that I would like to have main deckable, but I'll be happy to put in the sideboard to make sure my deck is more refined. Now I have the ability to have that effect in my main board, as well as a significant threat that's on the other side. And this is another reason why I keep talking about these cards that either have repetitive value or have multiple ways to get value, right? So it's only 2 mana, destroy an artifact or an enchantment. Doesn't matter what it is. Maybe you've put like a pacifism effect. Maybe you've got a ramp artifact. There's enough of that in your cube, I feel, that really makes this relevant. It's sorcery speed, who cares? But now I've got that in an adventure. It's sitting up there waiting for me to get to 6 mana to put this absolutely gigantic Thor-wielding Uber Bear with, just destroying Peter Pan's dreams. It's definitely not Paddington Bear, but it's not even a cute bear, but it's a cool looking bear. I just absolutely love this card. Love it very, very much. I think it's awesome.
I think it's great. May. This next one is this is another one that I want to kind of flag for the peasant listeners, right? We've gotten a lot of requests lately for peasant and pauper episodes.
Yes.
It's come up more times than not.
Very popular.
And our good friend, Chris, aka Sandwich, he's our expert. We're going to have him on a future episode to talk about and deep dive into this. But as we see these cards, it's so neat to me to look at the Fae Cube and see so many cards that are getting evaluated for Pauper and Peasant simultaneously, right? While talking about these cards, I think this card actually qualifies and falls neatly into that peasant type environment.
This is, and I will say, before we dive into this, right, because I can see how May is salivating about talking about this card. This, for me, is one of my potentially most power picks, right? Not just in this cube, but in the potential to be so impactful in a lot of other cubes and potentially other environments. May, just take it away. I know how much you're looking like you love this one.
It's so cute. It's an otter wizard. Plus, I have a specific story for this.
Well, let me ask you first of all, is this the first otter in the Fae Cube?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I'm here for it. But I actually have a specific story related to this card, believe it or not.
Okay.
So on Twitter, I actually proposed a card idea, and I would still like it to come into fruition, where I suggested 2 mana fairy, where the front side of the fairy was a 1 red flyer, can't block 1/1, right? And then the adventure side was a sorcery speed shock.
Okay.
And let me just say that I still want that card. I still want me a fairy adventure that is in red. That just, hey, it's a shock on one side and a flyer on the other. Love that. And it's interesting because immediately when I saw this card, I was like, this is pretty close to the kind of thing that I'm wanting for this deck. And if I can get more of these cards, I'm just gonna grab them all up. But the fact that this is a cute otter on top of that is just... It's called Frolicking Familiar, since I've been procrastinating this long. It's 2 and a blue for an otter wizard. Flying 2/2. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn, which, we love windrakes that scale
very
with
strong
our spell
value.
We love it.
Yep.
Adventure side is blow off steam. Pay 1, deals 1 damage to any target at instant speed.
Getting this early.
Love that.
It's so incredible. Getting it early. Dealing that 1 damage to, again, that value creature. Again, what's that? You've got a fairy that's reducing your instant and sorcery spells. Sure would be a shame if someone blew steam off on that creature. And then I
have a lot of 1 toughness creatures. And a lot of 1 toughness creatures being added.
Yeah, exactly. So that adventure side is incredibly impactful in the cube. And again, these flyers that have this residual repetitive value, +1/+1, it starts as a 2/2. Suddenly you've cast 1. Now it's a 3/3. Now this is becoming not just an early game significant advantage. Now this 1 card is representing a significant threat as well. And this is why I think cards like this are so strong. I love it. I do.
Love it.
What do you think, Bear?
It's not a bear. Let's start there.
Paddington.
It's an otter.
What do you think, Paddington?
You feel like an otter like it?
What do you think, Paddington? You ought to like it.
How dare you?
You ought to know how good this card is.
Little out of bounds.
All right, so let's move into Anthony. We got a couple of cards.
Ruiner. I'm not even going to let him finish. I'm so hyped. These are so. May's got cards picked out, but then I'm like, you know what? I'm going to just steal the spotlight for just a second. We're going to turn the camera away from the Fae Cube and talk about some of these cards that I love. Picnic Ruiner for 1 colorless and 1 mountain. You get a creature, Goblin Rogue. It's a 2/2 on one side, and then we got the adventure on the other side. Let's open up with the adventure. Stolen Goodies. For 3 colorless and 1 forest, you get a sorcery, Adventure. Distribute 3 +1/+1 counters among any number of target creatures you control. Love that. Like any kind of interesting. Oh, God, it's fantastic, right? And then whenever Picnic Ruiner attacks, while you control a creature with power 4 or greater, Picnic Ruiner gains double strike until the end of turn.
This is the treasure goblin from like Diablo 3, Diablo 4. It's like this, and I will say it's a really, really creepy looking goblin.
It's a
with
red
a basket. It's yeah, I mean, it's a red cat, but it's stolen this basket of, whatever from this picnic, and
it is the Yogi Bear of goblins.
It's creepy.
I absolutely love it.
I knew you were going there.
Yeah. But hey, boo-boo. How about we do some picnic baskets? This is fantastic. I love everything about this card. It's fantastic.
Oh, I love it. Auto include for the Fae Cube.
I would be interested to know that the adventure card being 4 and the creature only being 2 is always interesting to me, right? So you've got this not expensive, but 4 mana on the sorcery side. It's only distributing 3 +1/+1 counters, which is not insignificant, can actually be very significant, especially in green. But the creature itself is only 2 mana, and it's quite significant, right? So 2 power with the double strike. I mean, again, going back, Gruul. How aggro is Gruul in your cube, right? Because I feel like we're not talking as much about the archetypes, but tell us a bit about Gruul and how aggro you feel Gruul is and where this fits in with the potential Gruul aggro package.
So what's interesting about Gruul and its place in the environment right now is that it sits somewhere between the aggro and mid-rangey stuff, where it is trying to generate value by turning sideways and doing its thing. And while Gruul Goblins has come up once or twice, most of it has been because of Grumgully, non-human creatures, whatever, or with the impromptu raid type of decks have been experimented with a little bit. But what I like about this card is that I already run Hunting Triad, which is just 4 mana, make 3 green elf warriors, whatever. But it reinforces for 3, also for 4, to put 3 counters on 1 creature. This does the same thing, but can spread those counters. So it's already in effect at that same mana value that I already have. So it is not that far-fetched to include in my environment, but its face value of just being a Goblin Rogue for 2/2 is just so good. And it's so easy to get a creature with power 4 or greater and give it double strike. It's just, everything I'd want from a multicolored adventure card.
This is really cool for the peasant curators, right? I mean, It's an uncommon. But the one thing that I was a little saddened about is that it has to say you control. So, which leads me to the next card I'm going to talk about. But when I first saw this card in my 2-headed giant cube, I have a lot of, support your team type stuff, right? And proliferation. And I want to distribute counters on your partner. But in this case, it isolated it to yourself. So it didn't make it into that environment for me. But I would like to see our good friend Samich consider testing this card out in his peasant environment, because it's very powerful. And I mean, you can make essentially you could prep a 5/5 in so many words, right? For a rule that has double strike. This card is bonkers, which leads me into my next card. When I was going through the Wilds of Eldraine list, and I got a little greedy because I was looking at May's editions, but I wanted to pick my own. This card was for my 2-headed giant cube, and anything that says 2-headed hunter is an auto include for me, right? And for 4 colorless and 1 mountain, you get a creature giant, and it's a 5/4. We basically have an adventure again, which I love. With Menache. But twice the rage. For 1 colorless and a mountain, you get target creature gains double strike until the end of turn, which plays into that 2-headed giant aspect.
Absolutely.
Shout out to Chill, who's going to be on my team when we go to CubeCon.
Dream on.
Okay. And on the other side, you get a 5/4 menace, just giant It's fantastic. I love everything about this card. It does what I wanted to do. I wanted Picnic Ruiner to do that, and it didn't quite pull it off for me because I want to distribute the counters. But when I saw these two cards and I put them side by side, that was the dream. Which leads me up to this next card that I'm also going to steal that May put on her list. But then when I saw it, I'm like, oh my God, why is this not Jund? I would put this in my metal cube.
We
all day,
share
every
this
day.
as like a standout card because I love this one.
All right, go ahead and take it.
No, it's on your list. You take
We're
it.
going to argue over this card. This card's sick. Shrouded Shepherd. For 1 colorless and a plains, you get a creature spirit warrior, another adventure, right? A 2/2 on the one side, which we'll talk about in a second. The other side, the adventure. Cleave Shadows. For 1 colorless and a swamp. Creatures your opponents control get -1/-1 until the end of turn.
Such an amazing effect at only 2 mana with a card that has a 2/2.
And it's a spirit warrior.
It's so
it's-
good for only
and
2
it's
mana. on each
uncommon
side.
for the peasant
And it's
players.
uncommon, yeah.
Shrouded Shepherd enters the battlefield. Target creature you control gets +2/+2 until the end of turn for a 2/2. The reason why I love this card is I'm looking at it for twofold. I'm considering this for Uberbear's Horror Cube. I did not catch this. May added this to her dream list that she asked the fairy godmother for and got it, right? But for me, I'm looking at this completely different. Like, it's a spirit warrior. This art is sick, and maybe the -1/-1 would kill a bunch of spirits. So I might actually have an update for Uberbear's Horror Cube.
You have got to stop strengthening the spirits because that used to be my like easy 3-0 deck that I would draft out of that cube, and now everybody knows how strong the spirits are, and I'm not able to 3-0 as consistently as I used to be able to. So I'm on the fence about this one. I love it, but it might cut into my win condition because everybody now knows how good spirits are.
The real question is, why is this not Jund? This would go in my Munson Cube all day.
I don't have an answer for that.
Lords of Metal. Oh my
I don't
God.
have an answer for
All
that.
right. May, you
Let's
put this
go
on
to-
your list. May put this on her list. I stole it from her. May, why were you considering this card?
My 2-drop slots for white is very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Lacking. And it comes to finding relevant warriors and whatnot that are just strong enough for the environment, but not too strong that they are oppressive in the case of, say, Charming Prince, right? Great card, fantastic flavor, but what it does is so modal, so powerful, etc., that it kind of pushes what all the other 2-drops are doing to some extent. Shrouded Shepherd is exactly what I need to fill that role. It has an ETB, it increases your damage, and it's a 2/2 Spirit Warrior. It's your party, it has something worth flickering, and it has another built-in board wipe for all those little 1/1 goblins, fairies, elves, etc. that you can just clear the board at sorcery speed.
That's so fascinating to me, and I want to ask you to expand on that a little bit. Has that been a problem a lot of times when you've been evaluating cards for your cube? Is that a specific white problem that you're struggling to find cards that fit within a particular CMC that you're looking for, not because they're too weak, but maybe more of a white issue that those two or those maybe even just low CMC creatures, that it has been difficult to find cards that fill those slots in your cube because generally they're just a little bit too strong.
Definitely. And plus, once we start adding flavor into one of the conditions, there were a lot of cards where it's just like, hey, this card would be pretty good, but it doesn't do anything for the flavor.
What about other colors? What about other, like, how exclusive is that to white? Is it not at all? Or is it primarily with white, but you have found it with other colors? Or, what sort of how difficult have you found it with other colors compared to white?
White has had it the hardest time.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's had the hardest time. I've had more than enough in all the other colors that I can just pick and choose whatever I want. Versus white, I've had to hand select what is just strong enough to include in the environment, that's flavorful, that's interesting, that fits some specific roles. But there's a lot that don't fit my favorite profile, or they don't fit the power profile that I'm looking for, and it has been very, very difficult to find party members for that 2-drop slot that fit what I'm looking for. And this is exactly what I need for that slot. So,
Yeah.
What about our next card here that's kind of the, I guess we'll call it the spirited companion on enhancers? And it's Woodland Acolyte. May, would you mind taking this one away? This card is insane.
So I'm actually going to contest you a little bit. While, yes, it's creature type, while its creature side is another one of those 3 mana enters the battlefield, draw a card effects, it actually can be played as a Selesnya card, specifically as a 4-mana Eternal Witness. And that's something that people might not consider at first glance, because you can instant speed play it, pay 1, put target permanent card from your graveyard on top of your library for its adventure side. And that by itself is already that's already an effect that I'm interested in. It gives you something to play around with mill. It gives you something that you can play around with scry effects, etc. There's a lot of things that care about what you're going to mill, what's on the top of your library, what's worth protecting, etc. There's a lot of ways that you can interact with it.
Works real well with Coop Top, as we talked about earlier. Right? Exile the creature, put the Coop Top back on top of your library, draw it again, Cooped up another one of your creatures? Question mark?
What?
So Coop Top.
Are you referring to the...
It's the enchantment that allows you to exile a creature. So you can play Cooped Up, so an opponent's creature can't attack or block. Then you can exile it, Cooped Up goes to your graveyard, and then you can play the Mend the Wilds from Woodland Acolyte, put that back on top of your library, draw it, play Cooped Up again on one of your opponent's creatures, rip your aggro.
That's cool synergy.
We're breaking
And that's something
cube.
that I'm excited to explore. So... Woodland Acolyte is a 2 and a white creature for human cleric, enters the battlefield, draw a card, 2/2. And it's an effect that we already have in Troz at this point. And having that reclaim on one side and the ETB draw a card on the other, both those effects I like. Both of those effects on their own I've considered putting in. I've tried putting in reclaim. I already have the Spirited Companion. I've tried doing the dwarf one that gains you a life. These are already things that I've wanted to do. But having both of those stapled on the same card is so perfect for me, and I love this card. It is so good. I'm so glad that I'm including it. Plus, it's a cleric. I can't stress enough how hard it is to find clerics that match the flavor of this environment.
And it's uncommon for you peasant players. This is yet another card that's powerful in peasant, right? I mean, it just is.
Yes.
Kind of does the Ewit effect or reclaim effect and the doggo effect. It's fantastic. This next one, Stu is salivating literally to talk about this card that May has put on her list.
So this is 3 bowls of porridge, 2 colorless for an artifact food, and you get to pay 2 colorless and tap it to choose one that hasn't been chosen. And it's literally 2 hot, 2 cold, just right. It's, first of all, 3 bowls of porridge deals 2 damage to target creature, 2 hot, or tap target creature, 2 cold, or sacrifice 3 bowls of porridge and you gain 3 life. That was just right. Love that.
Love to see it.
Flavor-wise, one of our friends in our group, Nathan, was absolutely about this card from a flavor perspective, and I think it's absolutely incredible. I think thematically it's beautiful. It's got the one of the things I love about it, it's got 3 bowls of porridge, except one of the 3 bowls is in a bowl that's carved like a chicken.
Yep.
Let's just leave that out there for 5 seconds. And everybody who's listening, go to your chosen, card, whatever you look at cards, Scryfall, and go look at the art. And one of the bowls is a chicken.
Which one's just right?
The chicken.
The chicken.
The chicken, for sure. But yeah, love this card. Tell us, you're putting this in your cube, right? Tell me.
Oh, absolutely, I am.
What does this do? What does this do in your cube?
Oh, it does so much. I love having artifacts that have these shocks or removal effects tacked on. I already run like Scalding Told, Cauldron, Moonglove Extract. I already run these types of artifacts burn cards. And what's cool about this card in particular, get our red effect to deal damage, our blue effect to tap something down, or our, I'll just say green effect of just right, gain 3 life, right? And having that, all 3 of those mechanics stapled onto a food card just feels so good. And having all 3 of these modes all feel relevant for my environment. It can slow down the game, it adds an additional removal piece, and 2, shock is king when it comes to peasant and low-powered environments.
Yes.
And it's important to keep that in mind when you're assessing cards like these, because being able to deal 2 damage is a lot more relevant when a lot of your creatures have 2 toughness.
A lot of those fairies. Fairies have 2 toughness. Yeah, I love it. Flavor. Awesome.
Cruel Somnophage is our next one, and I'll try to keep this short, where it is 1 and a black for a Nightmares. Its power and toughness are equal to the number of creature cards in all graveyards, and it has sorcery speed, can't wake up. 1 blue, target player mills 4 cards. I'm in need of more mill cards. This was a card that I've been considering because, let's face it, its flavor is not fantastic for the Fae Cube. This screams Ashiok, it screams horror, nightmarish, etc., which is not that far removed from like Lorwyn, right? But this is a cool kind of tie-in for our mill themes. It has another mill thing tapped on, and unless its price gets higher, it fills a very niche mechanical role that I happen to need in my environment. So I'm willing to include it, even though its subtypes aren't particularly relevant. So,
yeah, so this is one of the cards that I actually considered for Uberbear's Horror Cube for CubeCon 2023. However, target player mills 4 cards. So I've pulled back from the mill, unless you have to self-mill. So that was, I wanted to discourage that because I didn't want to include that in my environment. So this is very Fae-oriented. But
Anthony's the mill fun police, is basically what he's saying.
Yeah,
it got abused. It got abused, and I really wanted to be self-mill, so there's that. The next one I do want to talk about before we come into closing is Ariette's Tempting Apple for 4 colorless. Legendary artifact food, and it's an uncommon. Again, peasant players. When Ariette's Tempting Apple enters the battlefield, gain control of target creature until end of turn. A threaten effect that is colorless. That's insane. Untap that creature, it gains haste until the end of turn. And you can pay 2, tap it, sacrifice Ariette's Tempting Apple, you gain 3 life. Or you can pay 2, tap it, sacrifice Ariette's Tempting Apple, opponent loses 3 life. I might have to look at this for Uberbear's Artifact Cube.
Pretty insane for a theft, for a theft.
I missed this card. I missed this card.
Right.
This is fantastic.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people did.
Yeah.
A colorless threaten effect for 4 mana is fantastic. That is a good rate for colorless that you can slam in any color.
Because typically you play 3, 1 red, 2 colorless.
Will actually do this effect for both 3 and 4 mana, but the fact that you get this at colorless and with 2 additional abilities, they're not like hit a creature, which I feel would be almost obnoxiously overpowered, certainly in any kind of low power. I mean, at uncommon, it would be ridiculous. But I still feel that like this is very, very powerful. That's what I said. At uncommon,
it's ridiculous.
At uncommon, it's like certainly if you could hit creatures with this at uncommon, that would be completely obnoxious. So
it's to the face. So the gain 3 life does the whole food fulfillment, right? Which
exactly.
is neat. But then the pay 2 tap, sacrifice Ariette's Tempting Apple, target opponent loses 3 life. That is strong. Nasty. Bolt to the face. Yep. That's really good.
Love it.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm probably going to add this to Bear's Artifact Cube. It's nuts.
It's a good card.
You better have ways to get it back.
With it.
Yeah, no, it's just fantastic, splashable, and everything. It's insane. May, do you want to talk about these last 2?
Yes. I will try to make it short and sweet because we're getting close on time. Hornlock Whale is just a 4 blue whale, 6/6. Flash 2. When it enters the battlefield, tapped unless it's your turn. It also has an adventure, obviously. 1 in a blue, instant speed. The owner of target attacking creature you don't control puts it on top or the bottom of their library. And it's interesting because I already run Sorko Serpent for this kind of role. It is a very adjacent card, and it'll add more density. And I already know what I'm going to replace with it. I have a card, Waker of Waves, I'm pretty sure is still in here. Nope, I cut Waker of Waves already. But it's going to be a good density. I need another just big, dumb top-end creature. It has Ward. We like Ward on our top-end blue creatures. Not a lot else to add. And the next one is Pollen Shield Hair, which is 1 in a white for a rabbit. Creature tokens you control get +1/+1, and it's 2/2. And it has an adventure again, where it's 1 green for sorcery speed. Target creature you control gains vigilance, and +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. So, like I mentioned before, my 2-drop slot for white has been very, very rough. And the fact that this can tie in all of our token themes into one deck, love it. I love whenever I can just get, hey, tokens matter. I'll just stapled onto a card. The Hair Rising, it's pretty good, but mostly I'm putting it in for that creature.
The 2 mana effect is very strong, like very, very strong, and the adventure side is this card is really cool.
Good card. Love this card.
So we're kind of moving over to the final thoughts here now, right? And May, this has been kind of your journey to CubeCon. You've got until September the 12th to make your decisions on what the new hot and piping flashy cards that you're going to add to the Fae Cube, right? No pressure. But my question for you is, out of this long list of Pauper, Peasant, and rare cards that we just kind of went through, also fit the Pauper and Peasant specifically, as we talked about it, is high take cards. My question for you is, how many of these you think are actually going to make it into the Fae Cube prior? What percentage, if you had to put a number to it?
So all the cards that I've mentioned, I want to slot in. As far as the percentage of the cards that we've gone through from just considering to guaranteed, I would say probably 80% of the cards that we've listed are going in. Like, the only ones that I can name off the top of my head is the Tegel Scouring, because it hit $5. It's probably not going to come down. Like I said before with Cruel Somnophage, it's in there because it fills a very important role, but it doesn't really fit my flavor conditions, and if it ends up not being able to fit into my 2-drop slots, I'm not going to try to force it in. I'm trying to think of anything else off the top of my head that might not make it in. Maybe Obira's Attendance. Oh, Into the Fae Court was one of the big ones of, I want to fit it in, I want to put a slot for it, but whether or not it makes the final list, we'll see.
Because of the tokens,
so I'd say
mostly?
around 80%.
Yeah.
How concerned are you with the wizard subtype with Riptide Laboratory? Like, how much of a consideration have you put with the fact that now you've got all these cards that have both of the creature types with a land that obviously gives so much extra value? How much concern has that been for building the cube?
My only concern would be if I need to introduce more land removal. Because if wizards do end up becoming a real archetype and a real thing that encourages so many different avenues, even within the same colors, that anytime that I can expand what people are drafting, it's going to feel good. And I think Riptide Laboratory has the potential to open up new avenues for wizard decks.
All right, so we're going to move over to our socials.
We're recording this, it's August 2023. As you all should know by now, it is CubeCon in Madison, Wisconsin, October 19th through 22nd. Over there at, what's the name of the con that it's at? I don't quite know.
Gamehole Con.
At Gamehole Con. I don't know if there's tickets left.
There are no more tickets.
There's no more tickets. So if you didn't get one, we'll see you in 2024. If you did, we're excited. We'll see you guys there. We're super excited. Best event of the year.
Make sure you check out the Cloud Goat Ranger, which is the live feeds they're going to be doing of the featured cubes.
That's true.
Of choice. It's going to be interesting.
Ranger.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be amazing.
So if you love the show, we would truly appreciate, give us a 5-star review on your chosen podcast player. We also have a affiliate with Alter Sleeves. Go check us out over there at altersleeves.com/UberCube. Get 5% off your purchase. If you want to support the show, you can also use our Inked Gaming affiliate link to go get your playmats, dice bags, mouse pads, all kinds of cool products over there. You can also reach out to us via Twitter. We are at UberCubeMTGPod. Or if you want to, email us, as our patrons did, left us some lovely comments. We are UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. And as always, come hang out with us on Discord. Hashtag UberCube, all kinds of cool stuff. Lots of new people coming and joining on. And as I've mentioned before, please come check out our Deck Bows channel, which I'm very excited about. And Anthony, I'm actually not tell us about that Patreon.
Thank you, Preston.
And thank you, Sam.
and we do love our Patreons. This is fantastic. If the Patreons have stuff they want us to talk about during these episodes, feel free to email us, message us over Discord, etc., and we'll be glad to do that. In addition to, we'd love to join up and play with you sometime. We want to make sure that we're doing everything that you are looking for in our show and more. And other than that, we're going to say the thing that we always say here at UberCube is Happy Cubing! Wilds of Eldraine. Let's go!